Hello, everyone. This is another edition of Dreaming in Symbols, the podcast dedicated to studying and discussing comparative religion, spirituality, mysticism, and psychology. While most platforms are dedicated to a reductionist point of view that emphasizes objective scientific rationalism or materialism, on one hand, that usually looks down on spirituality and religion. The other type of platform is typically at odds with this platform, and that platform is usually characterized as being a dogmatic, fundamentalist, literalistic perspective on religion. Dreaming in Symbols offers a third alternative to these two opposing perspectives. Dreaming in Symbols is dedicated to discussing religion and spirituality from a non-dogmatic, tolerant, universalist perspective, which focuses on the psychology of spirituality. Topics range from comparative religion, history, archaeology, spirituality, conversion stories, apostasy, pretty much anything you can think of. This is a special Halloween edition, and I think the only thing that's going to be scary about this episode is my voice. I am slowly recovering from a cold or the flu. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I'm not feeling 100%, so you'll probably hear that in my voice. My guest today will be Tom Mueller. He is a Master's in Divinity graduate student and is on his way to becoming an ordained Swedenborgian minister. Tom will be joining us momentarily. He will be coming online in due course, but I'm going to discuss his conversion story, how he became a Swedenborgian, and why he decided to begin a journey towards becoming an ordained Swedenborgian minister. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of who Emanuel Swedenborg is, he was an 18th century scientist, mystic, theologian who began most of his life by basically being a Renaissance man. He was a scientist who studied almost every type of subject you can think of, from chemistry to astronomy to geology. And he started to study biology, physiology, and became interested in the age-old question of the discovery of the soul. It was in his journey to discovering the soul that he had a major spiritual crisis, which led to a breakthrough of a fundamental religious nature. So that is a little brief synopsis of Swedenborg. But as I say, my guest today, Tom Mueller, who's just now joined me in the podcast. Thank you, Tom, for joining me today.
Hey, Colin. Happy Halloween. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you loud and clear, and happy Halloween to you as well.
Hold on. Now you should be able to see me as well.
Excellent. Good, good. I was just explaining to the audience that the only thing that's going to be very scary about this episode is the sound of my voice. So that's why I've explained that I have had a little bit of a cold, but I have given a little bit of a background of who you are, and the topic today is going to be about your conversion story to becoming a Swedenborgian. So I thought I'd start off by asking you, what was your initial religious persuasion while growing up, if any?
Right. So I was raised Roman Catholic, in a very sort of progressive Roman Catholic environment in Germany. So I remember we would go to church, as a matter of fact, at this place called the Ecumenical Center, which had a Lutheran and a Catholic church on the same campus. So very progressive, kind of Catholic environment. As a matter of fact, my father is a Catholic theologian. So that was my initial upbringing. I was an altar boy. We went to church every Sunday. Very kind of liberal, like I said, progressive approach to Catholicism. And throughout my teens, however, I actually was part of the LDS, or Mormon church. So I actually had a conversion experience in my early teens when I was around 13, and converted to Mormonism at that point, and remained very active in that tradition until about 19.
Wow. So what was it at that age of 13 that really caused you to go from being a Catholic to becoming a member of the LDS Church?
Right. I think it was, of course, an accumulation of a lot of different things, and of course, that age of entering into being a teenager is always one where I guess a lot of people start really going deeper into existential questions, spirituality, um, and so on one side, I think it was a disillusionment with what I was experiencing, um, sort of realization that a lot of the existential questions I was asking were not being answered, as well as often not being acknowledged as being meaningful. So I sensed a kind of externalization. Um, I think I used to call it back then, I would call it wishy-washy spirituality, a kind of watered down approach that doesn't necessarily go into a lot of the problematic aspects of religion, but also, in my experience, sort of, I sensed a lack of authenticity, a lack of engagement. Church didn't seem to go beyond the Sunday morning kind of experience. Um, and so with Mormonism, and I had sort of my first exposure to Mormonism actually during a trip here to California to the Oakland Temple, the Oakland LDS Temple, which is this beautiful building in the Oakland Hills. Now, of course, you can't actually enter the temple as a non-Mormon, but they have a nice visitor center. And I was just very moved at that point with the presentation, the kind of direct engagement with things that I felt weren't being addressed. Um, and quite honestly, at that age, I was moved and amazed by um, uh, the simplicity of answers, the straightforwardness. I call it simplicity now, but I think at that point I experienced it as straightforwardness. I felt that issues such as the afterlife, our purpose in life, etc., were taken beyond vague or abstract um, notions into a concrete kind of living spirituality. And that's very much what I saw in the Mormon community as I started connecting with them is a very much a sense of engaged spirituality where people took their teachings and their tradition incredibly seriously, not only externally, but modeled their life after them. And what I saw also at that time, and again at a very impressionable age, is the amount of sense of community, the amount of caring for one another, which, quite frankly, I experienced in my family, but I had never experienced in a religious community. Um, so at that point, I ended up just incredibly impressed. And Mormonism is a very evangelistic tradition, and based on that, I was very much exposed to the kind of um, contact you have with the missionaries when you start being interested in Mormonism. And there's a very it's almost a catch-22 kind of scenario when you look at the Book of Mormon, because of course you're asked to read the Book of Mormon, on which is sort of, it's kind of the foundation of the faith in many ways, on an existential level. Um, and there's a promise made to you um, in the last book of the Book of Mormon, which is a collection of several books, that basically if you pray about this with pure intent, you know, with a kind of humility and that kind of seeker spirit, then you're basically guaranteed an answer from the Holy Spirit that this is absolute truth. and I felt that happened to me. I prayed about it, and I felt moved. And so that's how it starts for. Ideally, that's how it starts for every Mormon. Is the notion of, you have a personal experience, a personal spiritual experience that's seen as a revelatory experience of God, Heavenly Father, confirming through the Spirit the truthfulness, the absolute truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, and thus the gospel, the church, etc. So that was my introduction to Mormonism, as it is for a lot of converts. That initial contact with the missionaries, and then personal experience with the Book of Mormon, which, like I said, was something that I hadn't encountered in my upbringing. In that sense that I could have this direct connection with the divine, right? So yeah, that was very much sort of the introduction.
Wow. So it sounds like really the draw was you wanted to have that sense of community and that actual experience, that sort of living spirituality. And it sounds like you had a really close experience with reading the text and praying. And so I'm wondering, after you had that spiritual experience, what was it like? What was the next step for you as far as transitioning into becoming a Mormon? What were the steps you had to take, etc.?
Right. Traditionally, the idea is that once you have, quote unquote, received a testimony, a confirmation, spiritual confirmation experience of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, and thus, as it's implied, the truthfulness, the absolute truthfulness of the Mormon gospel, and thus the institution of the Mormon Church, which are all sort of lumped together. So traditionally, the idea is you get baptized, you become an official member, and you start being part of the community. For me, it was similar, yet different. And I was sort of referred to as a dry member because one of the policies of the Mormon Church is actually that if you're underage, you need permission from your parents or legal guardians to officially join the church and be baptized. And my parents did not actually grant me that permission, until after years of sort of struggling with that notion of me becoming baptized. So it wasn't until about 3 years after that entire experience that my parents finally gave permission for that. But basically I started, being part of the youth group at the church. I started spending at least 3 evenings there a week, and then of course there's Sunday mornings. Traditionally it's 3 hours. The first hour is sacrament meeting, and then you have different so-called quorum meetings, etc., classes. And I was very active, and this was all in Germany. So I worked a lot with the missionaries. We had family home evening at the church. So very, very much engaged. And I carried this with me to the States when I was 17, and I started going to college in Northern California. And it was a beautiful experience in many ways, just being in the Mormon community, having that close-knit church family kind of idea. And I think philosophically or theologically, existentially, it was an experience of safety, because as long as you put enough faith in these particular issues, in the LDS world and LDS thought, still today is very much, there's this very deeply ingrained notion of absolute truth and of verifiable absolute truth. And so any major life decision, any major existential question is sort of answered for you. And that, of course, as a teenager, leaves you with this sense of security. And also, of course, the strict rules of living give a very sort of straightforward uh, guidance, so to speak, as to how one should live your life. And as challenging as it was, I felt it was very fulfilling to live that lifestyle of and in retrospect, of course, I often think um, subconsciously, this was a a perfect way of being countercultural in my environment at the point, being in a radically progressive sort of social environment and in a very much secular environment in modern Germany, which is quite secular cultural environment. Um, so yeah, that was sort of the experience. Very, very classic, going to church, being active, and living the lifestyle.
Great. So, so you've definitely felt a sense of community, and it makes sense that it was something I would imagine very different than as you described the secular German society. I think that's a great phrase to use, sort of a counterculture. Um, and so I'm wondering now, at what point then did your doubts begin to creep in, and what started your path on leading towards exiting Mormonism?
Right, right. Well, I'd say, there were doubts all along. I would assume that's what most people, even the most convicted religious people, would go through times of doubt, um, which is very much seen as, a doubting your testimony is obviously completely antithetical to what you've dedicated your life to. So there's this kind of psycho-spiritual notion of dealing with doubt, which in my experience as a Mormon it tends to be a tendency to suppress it, to pray for strength, to deal with that doubt and for reaffirmation of that sort of emotional experience of a confirmation of the truth. Um, and it was my late teens, again, sort of that classic stage where a lot of um, existential questions tend to come up for folks. Um, I was again very much active in the Mormon Church. I was getting my missionary papers ready, and I was actually about to continue my undergrad at BYU Hawaii, which is a Mormon school. And so you're at this sort of place where, the next step is a 2-year mission and Mormon education. So it's really hard to turn back after that point. So I was at this point, 17, 18, going into 19, where I started questioning a lot of the base assumptions of Mormonism on a deeper level. Really questioning the somewhat simplistic notion that any fundamentalist or literalist tradition, as far as I know, has within it, which is the notion of absolute truth, absolute falsity, and this polarity of good and evil. And there's this huge emphasis in LDS religion on knowing the truth. You will very rarely hear a Mormon tell you what they believe, and it's usually an expression of "I know these things to be true," and those things traditionally include, and as a matter of fact, you're asked these things by your bishop regularly in a private meeting. Do you believe that the Book of Mormon is true? And what's meant by that is historically accurate to the letter. Do you believe that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only true Christian church that was restored through the prophet Joseph Smith, etc., etc.? And I found that as I was developing internally, spiritually, intellectually, I personally could not answer those questions affirmatively with 100% positivity, and it became harder and harder to do so. And it was very much a matter of the desire was still there. That desire that I now believe led me into Mormonism to begin with, which is that desire for certain things to be true, because they are incredibly appealing. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I don't think they are simply appealing to a base emotional or materialistic kind of level, but that are appealing to us as spiritual beings at certain stages of our life. So I still have that desire for these things to be true. I couldn't imagine my life without them and without the absolute truthfulness of these ideas. But I found it harder and harder intellectually to feel like I wasn't being somehow dishonest with myself, with others, with God, and walking around, with my quote unquote testimony on my sleeves, as you're expected to, where I simply felt this sort of emergence of doubt and conflict in myself. And that took over a year, that process. And it was very much this cyclical process of doubt to a certain point, and then quote unquote repentance, where I would, go on my knees and ask for forgiveness for, the doubt, for questioning the testimony, ask for strength, et cetera, et cetera. And that sort of just kept spiraling and spiraling up until I hit a point at about 19 where I just went, I can't do it anymore. I've given it a whole year of, dealing with this feeling of inauthenticity and of dishonesty. And at that point, it was a fairly quick decision. I made scheduled a meeting with my bishop, which is kind of the pastor, asked to be removed from membership, and of course just stopped attending church and social events, etc. So that was how I ended up leaving the Mormon church.
What of Mormons that you had known for so many years, and what was the reaction of your bishop, of the bishop, to you saying, "Hey, remove me from the list," and all that? What were people's reactions?
Yeah, well, as it goes, it was kind of a, I didn't just, go up on the pulpit and announce to everybody that I was leaving. It was very much, just ended up not showing up and avoiding certain people. And the bishop's reaction was, on one hand, very proper. There's, of course, church officials are told very specifically on how to deal with each specific encounter. So it was a very gentle, very, very kind conversation I had with my bishop. I, told him my feelings and thoughts. And I often think about one part of the conversation, which is, and this of course was sort of his last chance. He has this 19-year-old kid, and the last chance, of keeping them in there. And I remember him saying, I have doubts too sometimes, but what keeps me going is the thought that even if the church wasn't true, even if the gospel wasn't true, et cetera, even if that were the case, I would still be a happier person, a more fulfilled person for having been Mormon than not. And I very much appreciate that connection he made. But in a sense, that conversation and that statement to me reaffirmed my decision, which came out of the sense of, or rather the acknowledgement, I believe, on my part, of I believed those things because I wanted to believe those things, rather than I believed those things because I had a somewhere close to nuanced or subjective or non-subjective exposure to them. So very much this notion of an affirmation of that idea of, you know, it's, I don't know if you know the fairy tale The Emperor's New Clothes, right? Where it's very much illustrative, I believe, of that kind of thing that happens to us psychospiritually. And this, of course, is throughout religious experience for a lot of people at different stages, is when you boil down to and you ask a religious person, why do you believe what you believe? A common answer I have gotten is, once you've dug in for a little bit, is I believe these things because I want them to be true, because I don't want, you know, my grandma to not exist, but I want her to have an afterlife, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry, my computer just told me it's running out of battery, so let me plug it in.
Sure. Well, I think that's yeah, I appreciate the use of the fairy tale in particular, and I can certainly relate to what you were saying about, you know, when I decided to leave Islam myself, I sort of did the same thing where I just stopped showing up and avoided certain people. So
right,
I can relate to that. But the difference being that there wasn't really any authority that I had to have a meeting with, and there were some Muslims that I still would maintain friendships with, even though I stopped considering myself at one point a Sunni Muslim, and then later on I kept going through different shades of Islam until finally leaving it. But I can certainly relate to that, of just, like, you know, not showing up and avoiding certain individuals.
Right. Sorry, I'm trying to find my charger and make sure I have it plugged in.
Sure, no problem. Well, if you're just joining us, I am dealing with a cold, so happy Halloween, and I hope my voice doesn't scare people off. But if you're just joining us, my guest is Tom Muller. He is on his way to becoming an ordained Swedenborgian minister, and he's telling us about his conversion story, which began with being a Roman Catholic. He then left Roman Catholicism and converted to the LDS Church, the Mormon Church. And we're at the point in his narrative where he began to have serious doubts, and then culminated in him leaving, apostating from the LDS Church, the Mormon Church. So if anyone would like to call in or ask Tom a question, just leave me a message or comment on this video, message me on the Facebook page, on Twitter. Many ways to get a hold of me if you'd like to be given the link to come into the show and join the discussion. So, so Tom, do you have is your charger all set, or?
Nope, all set. I'm just trying to turn the camera back on. There you go.
Oh, great. All right.
Sorry about that.
No, it's no problem. So yeah. So after you made this decision to leave the LDS Church, what was life like for you at the age of 19 as a former Mormon. I mean, you had said that you were thinking about going to a Mormon university, you were considering missionary work. So what was it like to suddenly not have those options on the table for you?
Right. It was definitely uh, a kind of radical experience on a social level, of course. I, um, didn't hang out with the Mormon crowd anymore. But I think one of the major quote unquote advantages I had was the fact that I was not my family or my immediate sort of social environment were not Mormon. I was living at that time with a friend of mine and her husband and child who I'd met at college, and they were non-religious. Um, so that was one advantage socially, is having, and of course my family to fall back on socially. And so I, went through internally very much a time of attempting um, sort of, I guess, attempting an absolute agnosticism, where I felt that, what the logical consequence of the whole experience for me was, well, I need to the degree that to which I can create a blank slate, or at least create a blank slate approach to existential issues, because I still found myself being drawn to spirituality, philosophy, religion. I had never felt that that sense of spiritual, at that point you could call it interest, or what I identified as interest, had gone away. So um, I very much attempted sort of an absolute agnosticism, which for a while entailed, exploring atheism, which I found to be a very exciting and liberating time experience for me. Um, and I ended up, and this is not, I'm not trying to make some existential statement here, but just reflect on my experience. But my experience was that I felt that my attempt of being an atheist reminded me in many ways of my initial Mormon experience, of trying to induce a certain argument into my life experience that seemed not to be genuine with what I was actually experiencing. Um, so at that point, I very much got drawn into generally the world of esoteric spirituality, mystical spirituality. This, in a way, started, and I guess I can out myself here, but it started with joining the Freemasons, which gave me a sense of community on one hand, and at the other hand, a forum for my own spiritual inner development. So I see Masonry in many ways as sort of a gateway drug into esoteric spirituality. So I started reading people like Manly P. Hall, and started studying people like Helena Blavatsky, Aleister Crowley, John Dee, and partially out of interest. And in my sort of dabbling with all of these different alternative spiritualities, uh, primarily in the Western esoteric tradition, I stumbled upon Swedenborg a couple of times as sort of a side note. It was actually in a theosophical context that I was first sort of introduced to Swedenborg, and that this dude existed at some point. So I ended up, as you do, Googling him, et cetera, et cetera. and reading about him. And that experience for me was an experience of a sense of reconciliation between the spiritual side and spiritual dimension I was feeling, to my life, to my consciousness, and on the other hand, the rational, the questioning, the skeptical nature that I had also, sort of had become sacred to me because I had experienced it as liberating me, um, spiritually, and psychologically. So there was this sort of sense that I felt reaffirmed and mirrored in Swedenborg's experience and his writings, that I encountered an approach to spiritual reality and to natural scientific reality, um, that I found was a beautiful middle path as a existential paradigm. So I fell in love with Swedenborg so much that I ended up finding this place called Brynäthen College, which is a Swedenborgian, a tiny Swedenborgian liberal arts college outside of Philly, and they offer a undergraduate degree in Swedenborgian religion. So kind of just on a whim, I kind of applied and got in and went, as you do at that age, and just went for it. And that was a beautiful experience for me. And I found that in that environment, I was able to seek and ask, and really found that while I maintain primarily that um, labels, identities, and particularly religious traditions or churches are more or less irrelevant to one's spiritual journey in their specifics and externals, I very much found that as a spiritual being, as a unique spiritual being, that this could be, and this, by that I mean the capital S Swedenborgian world, would be a place for me to be genuine in my spirituality, um, and ended up feeling a call towards the ministry, and sort of explored the different worlds within the Swedenborgian world, which, as tiny as it is, there are several different um, subgroups, etc. And so eventually ended up where I am now, which is at the Center for Swedenborgian Studies in Berkeley, California, which is sort of the quasi-seminary of the Swedenborgian Church of North America. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I guess I just wanted to backtrack a little bit. So did you find then, with your embracing of the Swedenborgian tradition, did you find that you could hold on to your previous esoteric groups or identities? So in other words, did you feel like there was no issue with still being a Freemason or exploring theosophy and also being a Swedenborgian simultaneously?
No, I never found that to be a problem at all. So my initial experience was with the General Church of the New Jerusalem, which is one of the two major denominations in the States, and sort of tends to be categorized as the more purist, or quote unquote conservative as it comes to interpretation, et cetera, et cetera. But there, absolutely no. I was very open about my interests, and was very much affirmed in my sort of syncretistic spirituality. And that has continued, very much a sense of Swedenborgians being a crowd where syncretistic spirituality, where one is opened up to different traditions, to different ways of looking at things. It's very much embraced. Um, and quite honestly, I have a hard time seeing myself as a minister um, in many other traditions, simply because I appreciate that to the degree where you are perfectly fine being a member of other religious groups. If you're a member of the General Convention, that is, of Swedenborgian churches, the more quote unquote progressive Swedenborgian church with which I'm affiliated. So there's very much this sense of people being open, people being on a journey of seeking themselves. So no, I never found that to be a problem or be viewed as problematic.
Great. And and I'm wondering, you mentioned just one part that you just mentioned there, that you couldn't see yourself being a minister in any other tradition. I'm wondering, were there other traditions for a moment that you considered the possibility of becoming a minister in that tradition, or did basically you became a Swedenborgian and you thought, yes, I'm going to go for this, the ordination process, or did that take some process for you?
Right. Well, one of the ideas that most resonated and resonates with me in Swedenborg is what he understands as the term church. Um, so while the term church has a very sort of central position in Swedenborg's theology, he never equates it with a particular organization or even tradition. The church is a state of mind. And the new church, the new age, which he proclaimed as being as happening, happens outside of, or rather independent from, in a way that transcends organized religions. So on that note, yes, I did at times, consider, well, are there other denominations that would support me on that sort of quest of being a minister, which to me, in a Swedenborgian understanding, simply means professionally dedicating oneself to helping others come closer to the divine and each other. So absolutely, I personally have a lot of respect and love for the Unitarian Universalist Association. Great tradition, great denomination, as well as a lot of the more progressive mainline Christian denominations, where you see a lot of amazing things happening, etc. But I really did find that even within the most progressive kind of circles, there tends to be an orthodoxy of sorts, and I don't think Swedenborgianism is an exception to that. But I truly do think that our tradition is unique. And I think being tiny is an advantage in that, but is unique in its diversity, and in its general understanding of that diversity. So I found that really being a wholehearted seeker, I think, goes hand in hand with being a Swedenborgian, or taking his experience and his approach seriously. But no, I really never went into that any deeper. Yeah.
Great. So, and I'm wondering, what would you say is your overall goal, or actually, I'll back up a little bit. How has it been for you during this ordination process? How
Mhm.
has that been for you? This part of the journey specifically, where you are on your way to becoming an ordained minister, how has that been for you?
Right. Well, so the way it works in the Swedenborgian Church of North America, aka General Convention of Swedenborgian Churches, um, is like I said, we have the Center for Swedenborgian Studies, which is here in Berkeley, California, um, which offers the certificate in Swedenborgian Studies. And this certificate, in combination with an accredited Master of Divinity, which is approved by that center, are the academic requirements for ordination in that denomination. Um, I happened to choose Pacific School of Religion, which is right here in Berkeley, as a school where I would pursue a Master of Divinity. Um, so that's, I'm in my third of 3 years of that program, the Master of Divinity at Pacific School of Religion, and the Center for Swedenborgian Studies Certificate of Swedenborgian Studies degree. Um, and it's been great. It's been great. The communication, of course, and of course, there is another sort of great advantage of a small denomination. Um, is it's kind of a family feel. I'm quote unquote meet um, every semester with the CAM committee, which is the Council for the Administration to the Ministry. Um, and there's a lot of guidance from the folks here. Jim Lawrence, who's the dean of the Swedenborgian House of Studies, now known as Center for Swedenborgian Studies. So again, I very much found that the small church environment was very, very nice and positive that way, to where it feels like there's very much an interest and a mutual interest in working together. So it's been a really nice experience for me. You still there?
Excellent. Yes, yes. Sorry, I was listening to you, and I also I thought I had someone who maybe was commenting to come into the show,
Mhm.
but it was someone who was just inquiring. I think they may be watching, but they were just saying that they had missed the first half of the show, and the person herself used to be a Mormon as well. So I was just explaining that we were still alive, etc.
Yeah.
But yes, and on that note, if anyone would like to call in, please let me know by either commenting on Facebook, send me a message on YouTube, Twitter, carrier pigeon, however you'd like to do it, and I'll send you the link for the chat. And so if you'd like to ask Tom some questions, but if not, and we'll see if that happens, but. So that sounds great that you have continued to find this engaged spirituality in this community, and so I'm wondering, once you're ordained, what do you have any sort of large plans? If you could see yourself 10 years into the future as an ordained minister, where would you like to see yourself?
hmm Um, hmm. That's a good question. I would very much like to do ministry in the denomination. So something that's very common for people that get a Master of Divinity degree and get ordained in a denomination is do hospice work, etc., which I'd very much love to do as well. Um, but I personally think that within the Swedenborgian Church right now, there are a number, for as small as a denomination as we are, there's a very substantial number of ministries that are happening right now that I believe have a sense of um, enthusiasm and a sense of um, active goings on happening. So there's very much in myself this belief that um, this is a paradigm, this is a tradition, and this is um, a set of works, talking about the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, that can provide a lot of people at this very time um, a lot of great community, a lot of great spiritual growth. I think they are absolutely relevant to the stage that we're in right now as a culture in the United States, which I think is that we are feeling very much that tension that Emanuel Swedenborg felt back then, the tension between rationalism and spirituality, the tension between um, religion and science in a very simplified way. Um, and so a lot of the movements that we're seeing out of this, the decline in organized religion, et cetera, I personally interpret as signs of spiritual evolution. Um, and so I believe that communities of people that are based on a nuanced understanding of spirituality, of philosophy, um, of psychology, et cetera, that get together and journey together in a seeking process very much has a future in this culture and in culture as a whole. So I think we are seeing a development where people are moving away from traditional ways of thinking, traditional ways of doing church, traditional ways of doing community, traditional ways of looking at the world. And I think there's great potential right now for communities to get together. And this, of course, has nothing to do with Swedenborg in particular. But I see a definitely an enthusiasm that's actually going on, especially with young people right now, where there is, in fact, spiritual movement going on. And it's just a matter of how do we manifest that. And I think that the Swedenborgian Church has that great opportunity in having that theology that goes so much hand in hand with this experience that we're going through. Um, so yeah, I'd love to actually do work with the denomination on that level.
That's great. And so I'm wondering then, with everything you've just said, would you say that that was a huge reason why you decided to become a Swedenborgian at that earlier point? Was that you could see that this was the right place for you to sort of have this middle ground between religion and science or rationalism or reason? Would you say that was a huge pull for you?
Yeah, and I think that's very much an experience that a lot of people that find the Swedenborgian philosophy, the Swedenborgian theology, in a stage in their life when they are quote unquote recovering from literalist or fundamentalist spirituality. Because one of the main emphases I see in Swedenborg is this radical reapproach of the religious and of the sacred, which reconciles a rational outlook with with a spiritual outlook. And what one great example of this, of course, is his approach to scripture and his exegesis, his interpretation of the Bible, where he appreciates the stories as they are, not as a literal account but as a deeper metaphysical, metaphorical, what he calls correspondential meaning, which relates intimately with our own psychological, psychospiritual process. Um, so yes, I very much the notion of this reconciliation of rationality and spirituality that for me, and I think this is a very common experience for people in this generation, was a disillusionment with the Bible in particular and with Christianity, having been exposed to on one hand what I experienced with an externalized experience of Christianity, and then on the other hand a rather authoritarian and literalist experience, I find that in Swedenborg, um, you get a beautiful sort of middle path that bridges this sort of false dilemma between rationalism and spirituality.
Right. So this dilemma then between that we see on a regular basis between reductionism or high level skeptical materialism on one hand versus the age old opponent of orthodox or dogmatic religion. For you, Swedenborg was a place where a third alternative. It sounds like for you.
Absolutely, and I really have to stress that I don't think this is unique to Swedenborg, but rather that Swedenborg was, as he claimed, a witness to an awakening that is going on and has been going on collectively in humanity, a deepening of our understanding of both spirituality and science. So rather than seeing these notions as absolutely intertwined or sort of owned by Swedenborg, I find that he simply manifests that kind of development that we can see all over the place, and it is in fact the universality that he speaks of that I think, for me personally, made it quite easy to engage with, because he completely, in my reading, gets rid of the notion of your salvation is at stake by your acceptance of this text, which is very much the impression you get in a lot of religious approaches, which is there is that sort of, you could say, emotional pressure, a psychological, spiritual, emotional pressure of, well, you can discern by yourself, but if you believe the wrong thing, you're kind of screwed. But what I saw in Swedenborg from the very beginning was this notion of, no, it actually kind of doesn't matter. It doesn't matter necessarily what your specific ideas are about God. It certainly doesn't matter on the large screen, on the large scheme of things, whether or not you think Swedenborg is BS or not. So it's very much this notion of this is not about believing a specific thing and somehow gaining salvation through it. So is that openness of being much more descriptive than prescriptive, as I would say, that I think makes it easy for people to engage with, because there isn't that pressure of, well, really, you ought to agree with this absolutely, or like I said, your existential salvation or state is somehow endangered.
Well, I think that's an excellent phrase to say that it's more descriptive than proscriptive or prescriptive. So I think that certainly we might say that Swedenborg is chronicling things that he perceived as being the case, a sort of evolution of spirituality and consciousness. But it's not about whether you accept everything dogmatically. It's a question of, I guess we might say, sort of experiencing or living, embodying this evolution of consciousness and spirituality. All right, yeah, and that's and so I'm wondering then, with just the last few minutes I have with you here on the show, would you say that you find Swedenborg more as a potential example to follow, or is it more important to just sort of reflect on what he wrote? Because I know that some people really take his biography very seriously. I'm just curious, how much of his biography plays a huge role in like your perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think my answer to that would be sort of twofold, because when you say, to what degree does his biography play a role? To me, it plays a huge role, because to me, there is that need for, in theologian talk, would be the notion of hermeneutics, and this notion of reading things in context, of being aware that, for example, that Swedenborg was an 18th century man with all of the baggage that comes with this. But at the same time, I think a very Swedenborgian way of answering the question of should this be viewed as a role model is, again, I think Swedenborg's experience is in fact descriptive of a spiritual change that that we can all go through. In a very simplified way, the reconciliation of what he would call love and wisdom, those perceived polarities. Yet at the same time, I wouldn't put too much weight on the externals of that. This notion of a spiritual a breakthrough, or this cataclysmic, you could almost say psychedelic mystical experience that Swedenborg went through for years of reporting out of body experiences, communications with all kinds of presences, etc., etc. I don't think that is necessary for us to go through, and it stands out as a unique example of someone's spiritual journey. But if you look again beyond the externals, which of course is what his thought is all about, if you just look beyond the externals of it, of time and space, of all of these notions, I do think that this is a process that we can and ought to aspire to go through, and namely this process of a reconciliation of love and wisdom. Whether or not Swedenborg went through that, I don't know, but I think he certainly went within to a degree that he produced this spiritual logbook that I do believe is incredibly illustrative of universal spiritual realities. But again, on the other hand, I think for this stuff, and I'm sure he would agree, as a matter of fact, he speaks to this very much, the notion of this stuff only works if you with your discernment as one of the agents. So it's very much a matter of thinking through this stuff. And one Swedenborgian minister put it the way he put it is he calls himself a Swedenborgian. I was comfortable with that identification because it is the most stimulating material to him. And sort of simply following that invitation to be spiritually stimulated by the questions that Swedenborg asks, and the realms of spiritual and psychological reality that he explores, and simply trying to see where does this fit with my own life. And I think if you're sort of doing that, you're on the right track. And really allowing oneself to maintain and really honor both of those elements within us, both the skeptical, the doubtful, the rational, and the part of ourselves that intuitively feels that there is more to our reality than simply the material and the external.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And I lied. I hope I can ask you one more question, because for the first time ever, I actually have a question from a listener for you. So I hope you don't mind if I ask this, but the question is from the YouTube user Wayman29. And this is in reference to what you said about millennials in this generation, and also doing outreach. His question is, how have the evangelical megachurches influenced how you personally do outreach to millennials as a Swedenborgian?
Yeah. Well, and I think at that point, thanks for that question. I think at that point, it's very important to note that Swedenborgianism is a tradition which does not proselytize. So there's very much this notion of this is not the absolute truth necessarily that everyone ought to embrace. So there is that sense of universalism of, well, a lot of people are fine, just doing and being what they are, and whether that's a Buddhist temple or whether that's a megachurch. So I think I speak for a lot of Swedenborgians, aside from our size, but on a theological level, I don't think the concept of a megachurch very much resonates with that. I personally don't draw much inspiration from that approach, which I would say is very much linked with the notion of evangelization and proselytization, which is not actually something that I'm interested in doing. But very much on the contrary, looking at and when you talk about millennials, what I find a lot with millennials, such as myself, is that we love to just sit around and talk spirituality and have an open dialogue. So really looking at what are sort of the organic structures that work for that. And I think, you see a lot of that in actually the emergent church movement, with, rethinking ideas of, well, why should the meeting be on a Sunday morning, et cetera, et cetera. But like I said, I don't think that a Swedenborgian megachurch is something we will see in the near future. And I don't think, we'd probably not be so thrilled about it either way.
For sure. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for joining me today on the show. It's been very enlightening, and I really hope that that I can have you back on to discuss another topic. But I want to thank you so much for coming on to discuss your own personal journey and for your valuable insights. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. It's been really nice, and I'm really flattered to have been invited. So yeah, I hope to be back soon.
Certainly. We'll definitely have you on in the near future. Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, everyone. So that was Tom Muller discussing his spiritual journey from Roman Catholicism to the LDS Church, Mormonism, until he became a Swedenborgian, and he's actually on the path to becoming a Swedenborgian minister. If you've just tuned in, if you've missed the entire conversation with Tom, have no fear. The show will be archived onto my YouTube channel. This is a special Halloween edition, meaning that the scary thing is that my voice, in particular, I'm recovering from the flu or a cold or some damn ailment that has knocked me on my butt for the past 48 hours. And whether good for me or bad for you, or hopefully good for you, I managed to get out of bed and boot up the computer and do this podcast today. So a happy Halloween to everyone, or All Hallows Eve. So what I'm going to do now, just to give my voice a little bit of a break and I can get hydrated, I'm going to play a song for my uncle from Spotify, my uncle Terry J. Lowe. All rights reserved. I have permission to use his music. I'll be playing a little musical intermission for about 4 minutes, and then I'll continue with just some discussion about the news. Religion news, usually from Twitter is where I get it from, and so we'll be back in about 4 minutes. I'm just going to switch over here so that you can actually hear the music. I had headphones on, but I want to make sure you all can hear it. So this song, get Spotify going here. This song here is a 4-minute song. Unfortunately, it's about 3 minutes, 39 seconds. No Halloween theme music, unfortunately, for my uncle, but this is from his most recent album, Morning Star Blues, and this track is called Castaway, featuring a number of other artists. Enjoy, and we will be right back after this musical interlude.
Your love was medicine to me. All the world so over me. Now I lost my ticket, lost my fare somewhere. Take this broken heart, let it bleed. Find a place for a mercy tree. Let the wave pass over me. Try the place we used to need. Cure the fear deep inside of me. Earthquake shook chandelier began to sway. Thunder broke, the lightning fired away. Common man with a common drum. Soft refrain of an ugly love. Don't look back from time to away. Take this token heart and let it bleed. Find a place for a mercy tree. Let the wave pass over me. Try the place we used to meet. Cure the fear deep inside me. There's a change in the weather, a change in the dawn parade. The red in the glass, toast a strange charade. Lost in the shadows of the reverie, born on the banks of disparity. Nobody questions it, nobody has a thing to say. Take this token heart, let it bleed. Find a place for a mercy tree. Let the wave pass over me. Try the peace we used to need. Cure the fear deep inside of me. The tide and the current won't wait for you. Listen to the weather signs, tried and true. Place your hopes on the thing I'll do. Let the pilgrim stones play. Don't let the plans of others smother you. Take this token heart, let it bleed. Find a place for a mercy tree. Let the wave pass over me. Try the place we used to be. Cure the fear deep inside me. Over the wind, past my time to care. Spent everything, all I had to spare. Your love was medicine to me. All the good so over. I lost my ticket, lost my fare somewhere. Lost my ticket, lost my fare somewhere. Lost my ticket, lost my fare somewhere.
All right, that was Castaway from the album Morning Star Blues from my uncle, Terry J. Lowe. Please check him out on Spotify. He has 3 albums on Spotify, and nice enough to be able to play music without getting sued by someone, as I like to say on this program. If you're just tuning in, this is Colin, and this is a Halloween special. In that I'm recovering from a cold, so my voice might sound scary. If you're just tuning in, you missed a great interview with one Tom Muller, who is a soon-to-become Swedenborgian minister, and he was discussing his spiritual journey from being a Roman Catholic to apostating from that to becoming a Mormon missionary, or excuse me, a Mormon, a member of the LDS Church. And before he became a missionary, he apostated from that and then decided to become a Swedenborgian. This show will be archived, like my other shows, on my YouTube channel. So if you'd like to go back and listen to that interview, it'd be well worth your time. I want to thank Tom again for coming on the show. So now, with the last 15 minutes, I would like to go down through the news on the Twitter feed. Cue your imaginary theme music for this segment of the show. I don't have music for it, but as I say, I'd like to find some, public domain theme music as transitional music. If you'd like to call into the show, please drop me a line either on Aussie CDA Facebook page, YouTube, Twitter account, and just let me know that you'd like to call in. So starting off with one quote from @Rumi Secrets. A quote from Rumi: "The joy that comes from logic and reason is brief." Not sure if everyone listening would agree with that, but I think that that's pretty apt, as the last thoughts that Tom had in the interview was sort of this middle ground that Swedenborgianism provides for him and other Swedenborgians, including myself, myself being a Swedenborgian, that is a nice middle ground that leaves room for doubt, skepticism, but also gives room for spirituality in a non-dogmatic sense. So we don't have to sacrifice our logic and our reason, but we're not wholly reliant on that because we do leave room for spiritual growth. There was one article I saw from the Huffington Post. I don't know how interesting this is going to be, but the Huffington Post about an hour ago, @HuffPostRelig, on Twitter, posted an article called "These Zen Buddhist Koans Will Open Your Mind." Excuse me. That's the cough from the cold. That was great that Tom was willing to talk, letting him talk as much as he did so that I didn't have to. So let's take a look at these Zen koans. And I think, yes, so the author is Carol Karuval, who actually tells you what a Zen koan is. A koan is a riddle or puzzle that Zen Buddhists use during meditation to help them unravel greater truths about the world and about themselves. Zen masters have been students with these stories, questions, or phrases for centuries. Many koans can be traced back to the collections of sayings amassed by Chinese priests in the 12th and 13th centuries. Koans may seem like paradoxes at first glance. It's up to the Zen student to tease out their meaning. Often after prolonged and exhausting intellectual struggle, the student realizes that the koan is actually meant to be understood by the spirit and by intuition. Don Dianda, author of See From Yourself, Zen Mindfulness for the Next Generation, puts it this way in his blog for Elephant Journal, quote, "The koan as a surgical tool used to cut into and then break through the mind of the practitioner. Koans aren't just puzzles that your mind figures out suddenly and proclaims, aha, the answer is 3. They wait for you to open enough to allow the space necessary for them to enter into your depths, the inner regions beyond knowing." We asked a few Zen Buddhists to share with us some koans that have been particularly useful in their practices. We hope their reflections will help you on your own spiritual journey. So here is one in particular submitted by a Dimitri Elruch, who said, who quoted Dojin Zenji. When asked why he practiced Zen, the student said, "Because I intend to become a Buddha." His teacher picked up a brick and started polishing it. The student asked, "What are you doing?" The teacher replied, "I'm trying to make a mirror." "How can you make a mirror by polishing a brick?" "How can you become Buddha? By doing Zazen." If you understand sitting Zen, you will know that Zen is not about sitting or lying down. If you want to learn sitting Buddha, know that sitting Buddha is without any fixed form. Do not use discrimination in the non-abiding Dharma. If you practice sitting as Buddha, you must kill Buddha. If you are attached to the sitting form, you are not yet mastering the essential principle. The student heard this admonition and felt as if he had tasted sweet nectar. So that was from a koan, if you practice sitting as Buddha, you must kill Buddha. Another one, what do you call the world? This is from a Reverend Zisho Susan O'Connell, the Zen priest, president of the San Francisco Zen Center, who quotes from the Book of Serenity, Dezong asked Sushan, "Where do you come from?" Zushan said, "From the south." Dezong said, "How is Buddhism in the south these days?" Zushan said, "There is extensive discussion." Dezong said, "How can that compare to me here planting the fields and making rice to eat?" Zushan said, "What can you do about the world?" Dezong said, "What do you call the world?" I feel like there should be like, boom, oh, moments after, after reading some of these. Fascinating. Yeah, you know, I practiced Zen myself, and it was from the tradition that doesn't really use koans. There's two major schools of thought in Zen as it exists in the United States. I think it's Soto and Roshi, I believe is how they're pronounced. And I practiced the one that didn't use koans. But I still, I mean, they were quoted, but you didn't really have, you weren't given a koan to practice and then go in front of the Zen teacher, and then, you know, the Zen teacher would decide whether you quote unquote got it. Excuse me. Well, let's continue on with another one, because these are pretty cool. This was submitted by Professor of the Karma Lesky Zoma, Professor of Theology and Religious Studies from the University of San Diego. Master Huang asked Huang Zhang, "Where are you coming from?" Huang Zhang said, "Mount Song." The master said, "What sort of things come here like this?" Huang Zhang said, "To call it a thing is to miss the mark." The master said, "Can it be cultivated or experienced?" Huang Zhang said, "It is not that it isn't cultivated or experienced, but rather that it isn't corrupted or defiled." The master said, "It's just because it isn't corrupted or defiled that it's treasured by all Buddhas. You're like this, and I am like this." And that is from the Platform Sutra. So if you're interested in reading more of these koans, you can find them on the Huffington Post Religion Twitter feed. So we'll move on. But I think, you know, I love Zen. I think Zen's awesome. I've known a number of individuals who have practiced Zen while simultaneously practicing whatever faith tradition they belong to. I've known, you know, people who just consider themselves Zen Buddhists. My uncle and aunt are Zen Buddhists, so Zen has been around my life for a long time, and I very much appreciate it. So moving on down here, I hope everyone is having a safe Halloween. If you celebrate Halloween, please have a safe time tonight. Hopefully, everyone will be safe and have a good time tonight. So looking at Thich Nhat Hanh, speaking of Buddhism, this must be the theme for today. Thich Nhat Hanh, at Thich Nhat Hanh, 2 hours ago, posted that Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous Zen Buddhist master, receives the Passam in Terrace Peace and Freedom Award. So he's getting on in years. Thich Nhat Hanh, I think, is pushing, he's in his 80s. He knew personally Martin Luther King Jr. He's met the Dalai Lama. His health is not that great. But it looks like he's been awarded this Peace Award. And the picture here shows the presenter is a Catholic priest, if I'm not mistaken. So Thich Nhat Hanh is still doing great work, even at his advanced age and considering his health. So another thing, and I might do a video about this in the future, a non-podcast video, which I haven't done in some time. I've been paying attention to the back and forth between Essence of Thought, Peter Thurston, and Hamza Zortzes of I-Era. So now to completely switch gears, we'll go from Zen to YouTube debates. Peter Thurston is a famous atheist YouTuber who has been taking it to I-Era and Mission Dawa on YouTube. His most recent video has been about Mission Dawa pretty much trying to limit science and reason for the sake of religion. I found myself agreeing with some of the points made by Peter Thurston, but also I found myself agreeing with things that Ira was saying. And it must be because I consider myself this third perspective, where I have sort of like this, as Tom was saying earlier in the program, this sort of reconciliation between spirituality and science and reason. The reason I'm bringing this up is because Peter Thurston had, Hans Zortzes, I should say, had said to Peter, yeah, come on down to the IUR office and we'll have a debate. And when I heard that, I thought, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to pop some popcorn. I can't wait for this to happen. Well, Peter agreed to the debate, but decided that he wanted to have the stipulations be a little different, like a more neutral ground, like maybe a university campus instead of the IURA HQ office. Since then, Hans Zortzes has not, as far as I can tell, agreed to what he originally said, that he would debate Peter Thurston. I mention this because the Rationalizer on Twitter has said, I must say I'm very disappointed with the way Hans Zortzes baits people to debate him and then pulled out. And this has apparently been a trend with Hans Zortzes, that he will proselytize, his organization will pump the interwebs full of proselytizing for Islam, will challenge people to debate, and then drop off. I think that's very unfortunate, because I think it'd be incredibly entertaining to see a debate between these two individuals. So I'm reminded of this by looking at my Twitter feed and seeing a reminder from the Rationalizer with this regard. Mary Oliver has a new book of poems out. Huffington Post, HuffPost released 3 hours ago, stated that in her book of poems, there are 8 deeply spiritual moments. Her poetry is fantastic. I would recommend it to everyone. I'm not going to read the whole article because we only have about 3 minutes left, but shout out to Mary Oliver and her new book, which, according to the Huffington Post, has some excellent spiritual moments contained therein. So, realize now, with calling this a Halloween special, I haven't really talked about anything about Halloween. I know that I did see an article at one point, Joseph Campbell's mythological explanation of Halloween. Be sure to, I'm sure if you Googled that, you'd be able to find it. It'd be fascinating to see what the late Joseph Campbell had to say about Halloween. Speaking of Joseph Campbell, a new book just published by the Joseph Campbell Foundation, if I'm not mistaken, called The Grail. I think it's called The Grail Quest or The Fascination with the Grail or something like that, but it's a whole collection of previously unpublished documents written by Joseph Campbell, the famous mythologist, on the topic of the Arthurian legends. No doubt I will do a YouTube video on that subject. It'd be fascinating to see what he had to say about King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, etc. The Holy Grail. Another quote from Rumi: "From a beautiful thought, my spirit came alive, bringing the bride of poetry into my wedding chamber." Rumi hits it out of the park again. Looking at CNN with 1 minute I have left here, Egyptian officials both fight data records recovered if Russian passenger's jet crash site. So again, prayers and good thoughts towards, supportive thoughts, I would say, to those who are suffering at the hands of the continued conflict that is happening in the Middle East right now. While many of us might be safe in our homes, there are many in our human family that are struggling. And so we send them positive vibes and prayers to those who are having a difficult time right now. Well, with 1 minute left in the show, everyone, I think I will end here. Next week, I am hoping to have on my show a Swedish theology student, to talk about the concept of the Trinity from a Christian and Muslim perspective, hoping that I can sync up time-wise with him, since he is in Sweden. If I can't, then we might have to do like a special recording and just do multiple episodes next week. We'll see. Still hoping to have Klingshore on the show, but I know he is very busy. And kind of up in the air right now as far as what next week will bring. But we certainly will have a special... we'll continue with the podcast next week, 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If anybody has any suggestions for guests or for topics, please feel free to message me and let me know what you think. Appreciate all comments and feedbacks. And thank you all for watching. Happy Halloween to all. Peace be with you all.